Welcome everybody to the June 2022 Conveners member call. Before we get things started, I'm just going to do our quick introduction, let you know what we're going to be talking about today and who's going to be talking to us about it. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen with you. Alrighty. So my name is Colin Eddy. I'm the events assistant with conveners.org. Normally we are joined by my colleague, Sarah Sterling, who typically leads these calls. She is enjoying some well-deserved time off right now, so she is out for a couple of weeks. So I'm happy to be able to kind of take you guys through the intro to today's call. Today we're going to be talking about why design matters. So tips for inclusive and engaging facilitation. We're going to be talking with Robbie Samuels here today, who I'm very excited to pass things over to in just a couple of moments. But before we do that, just a little bit more information about us and who we are and what we do for those of you who might be newer to the community. So this is just a small part of our team. We are a globally dispersed remote team. I'm based in Canada. We have a number of people based in the US. Sarah Sterling is based in Guatemala. So if you have any questions about running a remote team, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to share any experiences or resources that we have with you. A little bit more about Conveners. We do our work in two primary sort of buckets. We are a global membership community, first and foremost, which is what brings us here today, of purpose-focused impact conveners. What we mean by conveners is any organization or individual who's passionate about bringing people together to create some sort of catalytic social or environmental impact. And then we also have our advisory services where we help other organizations and institutions achieve their convening goals. If you have any questions about anything that we do or how to make the most out of your membership, please reach out to either myself or Sarah. She'll be back again in a couple of weeks. I will share some links when I'm done with my email and stuff once I'm done speaking, in case you should want to reach out. Our time together today, we're going to do our welcome. Our community connection is actually going to be led by our guest spark today. So I'm taking the day off from community connections. So I will pass things over. So that kind of will lump into our guest spark presentation today. And our guest spark for the day is Robbie Samuels. So Robbie Samuels is a person of many talents. I'm very excited to introduce you all to him. He's a best-selling author. He's a business growth strategy coach. And the reason he's here today is he is an event design consultant and executive Zoom producer. He works with a number of mission-driven organizations to help them strategically bring their events online with less stress and with greater participant engagement. And when he and I first met to discuss the possibility of him leading a member call, I was really inspired by his insights and his experience in this space. And I know he has a lot of great stuff to share with us today. So without further ado, I will pass things over to Robbie.
Excellent. Hey, everybody. Nice to meet you. So let's do a little connection space. What I'd love for our folks to do who are here is we're going to do a little win-win. So a personal and a professional win. And there's enough of us right here that we can actually accomplish this in this room. So take a moment and think about a personal and a professional win, and then we'll get a chance to share. I'm going to start by giving you an example. So my professional win is that I purchased and have been using a remarkable tablet. And if you're a person like me who likes to write things and you have things like this all over your desk, and it's just becomes very overwhelming because crossing things out doesn't take them off the page and it just becomes cluttered. You have to constantly rewrite. When I'm done with a task, I can just delete the task and it's just gone. And so I've also been using it. I have a journal that I'm doing as part of a course that I'm in. I uploaded the PDF and I can actually journal in the same way and save it and have it all sent to the cloud. So been really a big life-changing thing for me. My personal win is that my wife is away for a couple of days for a work thing, and I have an amazing sitter taking care of my kids during the week between school and camp. And because of her, I'm able to be with you today. So that's my personal win. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to go alphabetically so people know when it's their turn. We'll start with Abby. Abby, let me give you a chance to come up here and share your personal and professional win.
Thanks. Nice to be here. Let's see, personal and professional win. I'd say my professional win is TBD on if it's an official win or not, but trying to get some speakers for our big CEO summit coming up in October. And this morning I heard from our community members saying that they are talking with the deputy CEO of IKEA, who may be interested in coming out. And that would be a big win for us if that works out. And that I heard this morning that Mark Benioff from Salesforce is going to let us know in July. So those would be two amazing speakers to have come out for our event, for our community. And then personal, I would say I moved my desk to the other side of the room. It's been in the same spot for several years. I work from home. And now it's by the window. You can't see, but now it's by the window and it's by my plants. Which is nice to be here close to the plants, close to the breeze coming in. I got a smaller dining room table that does not take up half of the room, and it's tucked in the corner, and it just makes the space feel much more spacious. So it's a better workplace. Thank you.
All right, Colin, you're not off the hook. What's your personal and professional win?
Personal would be, I just spent 5 months escaping the Canadian winter. Personal win would be returning home and having the opportunity to see all my friends and my family again. So I've been home for a couple of weeks now. So that's been quite nice. Professional would be a very simple $15 purchase of a laptop stand. I have quite bad posture, and I try to be very mindful of it, but I'm not that good at it. And so I spent the last 5 months hunched over my laptop. And now that I'm home and I'm at my desk again, I purchased a laptop stand. I have my second monitor. My laptop is now raised, and I no longer have to feel hunched over. So I'm enjoying it so far.
Awesome. Quick tip is to look at the camera as we're all saying what we're saying. Practice that. Look at that. I think Della is ready to go. She's looking right at the camera. Della, what's your personal professional win?
Instead of looking at yourself like we tend to do, right? So a professional win is I've been in business development at my company named Meet Green for 13 years. And it's never been busier, and it's just so rewarding to see more and more people and companies interested in event sustainability and guiding them on their journey toward that. There's just really never been a better time to be doing this. So that feels wonderful. A personal win is that my husband and I invested in, we live in Las Vegas, and we've invested in solar screens for our house, mostly because we needed to replace our screens anyway. But we thought that we would try to create some shade in our windows. And I just got the electric bill yesterday, and we're down by 24% in our electric bill. So I don't know if it's hot or whatever. It felt like a hot May. So I think that was really a good thing. But anyway, yeah, felt really great.
Awesome.
Awesome. Pay off.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Cassie, you'll tell us.
Got it. Can you hear me okay?
We can indeed.
Okay, perfect. So Abby, I just okay, well, I guess I'll start with personal. Well, first I'll say I'm Cassie Holmes, and I'm a program manager in Net Impact, and I'm excited to join this call. So for a personal win, my husband and I ordered probably about 6 months ago windows for our home to be replaced, and they are finally being installed today. So I am, yes, very exciting. So I am working from my mother's house. And Abby, I was laughing when you said that you rearranged your desk, because at the start of this call, I totally rearranged as you were all speaking, like how I was sitting and like the lighting situation, because I was struggling a bit. It's not my usual sort of workspace. And then professionally, we just finished up at Net Impact our event series for this past kind of fiscal year. So our virtual event series just finished up on June 7th, and that was all focused on a regenerative economy. And we had some really great speakers, and we could just kind of wrapped it up. So it's nice to be sort of finished with that and planning for next year.
Awesome. Excellent. So now that we've all just done that, I'm going to use this as a train the trainer moment to share a little about why I love this exercise. I've been doing a variation of this for probably about a year and a half. I've been hosting a weekly No More Bad Zoom virtual happy hour since March 13th, 2020. which is the day the world hit pause. And I was trying to figure out, what do I do? I have an in-person, my world was all about in-person events and teaching people how to network at in-person events. And that was not going to happen. And I didn't know by hosting that virtual happy hour that it would lead to everything that has happened in the last 2 years. But one of the things I love is that I have this community that comes every week. And by asking people to come with their personal professional wins, and we get in small groups, if it's a group of more than, I would say, 30 or so people, I do groups of 3 for 6 minutes. If it's smaller than that, I'll do groups of 2 for 5 minutes. And the distinction is that if it's a bigger group and you send people in groups of 2, you increase the chance that there's going to be someone whose internet doesn't get them to the breakout room, and someone is therefore sitting there wondering where their partner is. And it's harder to catch that when you've got, 35 rooms that you're reviewing. So if you have 3 to a room, it's just more likely that at least 2 of them are going to get there. And so far, that has actually been true for me. And 3 for 6 minutes really works. I always make sure that the timer is showing on the top right. So you have the countdown clock here, and there's a setting for that. And I tell them the order that they're going to go. And that's that when you first get into a breakout room, people usually go, and some people are like, what was what are we talking about? And then everyone else is like, who's going? And then there's someone who's a natural facilitator who feels like they need to step up in some way. And, here's an example of, if we have a good, thoughtful design, we aren't just having engagement with a checkbox, people engaged, but we're really inviting people to participate and fully participate, whether it's their first time or their 45th time. They have a way in. They know what the rules of the road are, and it's all very clearly stated out. The other thing I like to do whenever I send people to a breakout room is I'd like to be really clear about the question, and it's a singular question. It's not, here's 3 things I want you to share. I actually went to an event where virtual networking event that someone had been hosting for a while. And it was, let's see, there were 7 of us for 15 minutes, and there were 3 questions. So already there should be some alarm bells going off in your head. So there's 7 of us, 15 minutes, 3 questions that each of us was supposed to respond to. No direction about who went first, no clock to tell us how much time had actually passed. And the first question was, tell me about a challenge you're facing. So what happened is that the first person went, and then the rest of us spent most of the rest of the time trying to help them with their challenge. And I, at some point, said, hey, folks, there's about 3 minutes left. Should we just do a quick round robin? So Abby, what else do you notice about that problem? Let's invite you to come up here.
Well, I mean, the problem seems very clear to me. I would not do that. So I understand that. How do you feel about, we have a call actually coming up at the top of the hour, our monthly call. And what I do is put forth 3 or 4 questions and tell people that to use them as sparks. So they don't need to answer the question exactly. It's sort of like 3 or 4 questions around a theme. Because I feel sometimes when someone gives me a question, it makes me anxious if I don't feel like I can answer that question exactly what it is. So do you feel like that's a good way of doing that? Giving sort of three questions or 4 questions that are in the same theme. And I just tell people, like, respond the one that resonates most with you. And if one of these isn't resonating with you, you pick the question and respond in the way that makes, is that more or less?
So it's still a little more confusing, but if you want to help people feel more ready to respond to the prompt that you give, then the other part of the exercise is that you give a response. You or somebody, before people go off to the breakout rooms, says their answer to the prompt, which is what I did, right? I was like, so my personal professional win is, and I showed you something, I said something, and you might pre-plan to pick on, to call on somebody that they, hey, this week we're going to have you give the response. Now, here's why this works. This is sort of psychologically why this works. So whenever somebody, let's say you're just seeing a family member or roommate after a long day of work, and you say, hey, how was your day? And as soon as they start telling you the story about their day, you immediately think of things you want to tell them. You hadn't been bursting at the seams when you asked them, But as they tell their story, your brain starts to pick up on ideas, and suddenly you're full of stories you need to share. That's because stories beget stories. So the time you take to not just say, here's the question, but here's the question or the prompt, and here's a response, here's my response, or here's this participant's response, gives their brain a chance to start to get some ideas about how are they going to respond. And if you give them some sense of who's going to go first. Now, the who go first thing I've seen get a little bit cutesy, and I have made the mistake of being overly cutesy. So my best practice now is alphabetical by first name, reverse alphabetical by first name, alphabetical by last name, reverse alphabetical by last name. That gives you 4 different ways of doing it. If you have multiple breakouts, switch it up. But if you're doing brightest shirt or shortest hair, there's always a moment of having to like discern that.
Right.
And the shortest hair thing, every bald guy in the room has to make a joke about it. And it's just like, that's not helping them. And it's not, I'm not learning anything about them. So I think if you could, and I'll just bring it back on here. How do you feel about this? If you could get like a clear enough question that people could, you have to know your audience a little bit. This is why I love the wins question, because it works for every audience. But if you have a question, like sometimes I do things where it's a mix of entrepreneurs and not entrepreneurs. And so I have to word a question.
Right.
So it's not just like about your business.
Yeah. I like that. And I'll say typically, our questions are things like, last time we talked about, I think it was like mental health in the workplace. So I'm giving people, 25 minutes in a group of 3. So what I don't want to do is give them one question and they're like, I've answered my question in 1 minute. Now we're just sitting here. Well, they're CEOs and senior leaders, and the point of this isn't just come in and like check in and have a check-in. The point is to get them to building relationships and actually having meaningful conversations. It's intended for that. And whenever we don't give them enough time, they're like, oh my gosh, we didn't have enough time. So it is intended to be that. So thus the kind of more involved questions, more options for questions. So it's not necessarily supposed to be like a check-in question, but the intention of the call is to be prompting conversation. So maybe that changes your.
Yes. I mean, I think that purpose first is something we should always have in mind. Like, what is the goal of the session? What is the goal of each breakout? Should dictate how long it is, how many people. Usually anything over 15 minutes would need a facilitator of some kind, because usually that means you're having larger groups. You're going to have 5, 6, 7, 8 people, 15, 20, 25 minutes. And then you might need to have someone guiding the conversation. If you're giving people more than 2 to 3 minutes a person to share, then yes, I can see why you'd have multiple questions. You're kind of saying, you're now diving in. You're like, hey, you have 25 minutes to dive deeper into a conversation.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I guess that's where,
or do you have better idea? That is a question, is how do you think about that? But if you have a better idea for a way to do that, I would love to hear that also.
Right. Well, so, a series of breakout rooms where they're getting to meet more people, you might do sort of a mix. So you might have 2 rounds of kind of quicker, round robin of some question. So they get to meet more people in the room, because even when they go into a live in-person event, before the presentation begins, they would have had an opportunity to mix and mingle with people in the room, and not just the 2 people sitting next to them. So giving people some of that, but you'd have to set the rules like, hey, this is meant to be this kind of interaction, not the 25-minute tell your whole life story. This is come in and share these wins, or come in and give your 2 cents on this. You could, by the way, get people to share challenges, but the way you word it would not be tell me about a current challenge. It would be share a time you faced a challenge and how you overcame it. And that way we all get to hear some of the things people have had to struggle with, but also we get to learn from them, and we get to witness and celebrate their resilience. And that often goes faster around the room, because people aren't like, oh, I have to help you fix that. Or I have a tip. It's like, no, this thing happened in the past. I'm fine. It's a lesson I learned.
Yeah.
So that could be an interesting way to kind of bring people in, because is it better? This is always a question, and every community has its own culture. Is it better for 3 people to go deeper for 25 minutes, or to split that up and have them meet two groups of people in that same time frame, and in between you invite them to come back and debrief it. Let me just say a few more things about virtual versus in person, because bottom line, events are about content and connection. The reason we got on planes and are starting to get back on planes to go to conferences in far off lands isn't just for the content, right? That desire has to also include the desire to meet people. And in fact, there was a study that said that 76% of people surveyed found that the top driver for why they were going to events was networking. And that was the International Association of Exhibitions and Events study. So, when we all went to virtual back in 2020, prior to that, virtual was just like bonus content. It was the webinar that you would occasionally get invited to. But we weren't really seeking connection the same way. But if this was going to be the way we were, engaging and connecting and getting to know each other, well, we had to find a way to meet that promise of content and connection. And that was what drove me into the virtual space. That is how, I didn't become a virtual event design consultant because I love Zoom and I love tech. I happen to have grown to love all these things, but I was like, well, how do we help people design these spaces and facilitate these spaces in a meaningful way? So in person, it's theatrical, it's big, but notice how my hands disappear outside of my box. We can't do that. We also don't have all of our senses. This is actually an article in Fast Company. This is going back a ways. I'll put this article in here. This is by their global events director of Microsoft, was talking about how events are in person are theatrical. And he said online events are cinematic. What we're competing with is TV. And then I started thinking about how it's really each session, each time we're on, it's episodic. It's if you can think about even neuroscience says that adult learners, it's 7 minutes, then we need some kind of shift in what we're doing. And even if I'm presenting, I'm using my hands to attract you. I'm putting information in chat. I'm calling on people. I'm inviting people up on stage to change the view. I might share my screen. All of that could be micro ways of making slight adjustments to keep you in. I'm also looking at the camera. If I'm presenting to you, Abby, and I'm like, oh, Abby, here's my answer. Abby's not feeling like I'm talking to her. No, neither is anyone else watching. So looking at the camera is like a simple way of doing engagement. I think that Zoom fatigue can be avoided because it's largely a combination of not having highly relevant content, which hopefully we can avoid that. Have content that is relevant for your audience, and just not knowing how to do the execution of a really well-designed event. And so little things will, break that. Could be someone saying like, okay, when you get into your breakout rooms, you're going to see a clock up here in the top right. That's not your top right. Or go up here to the top right and click on the 3 dots. Again, that's not your top right. And that is a little moment where your brain has to work harder to try to understand what's going on, because what you're looking for is this. And by the way, whether you have mirroring on or off only affects what you see, not what your participants see. This will always be in the right direction. You will never see the words backwards on your screen. So on another example of this is go to chat and raise your hand. Go to chat. That's never been the setting. And I hear people say it all the time. And so we want to be thoughtful in how we're designing. We want to understand the platform and the settings to give the right instructions. I tell people who go through my courses to actually write out the instructions in parentheses, the way you might stage directions. So you know that you're saying a stage direction, or I'll tell them that in parentheses, with my left hand, point to the top left corner and say, in quotes, go to your right, until it becomes natural. Or, this is where reactions is, not here, right? Earlier, I said to Colin, go to your security badge. What if I had said, Colin, go to your security badge? Colin was already confused because he didn't even know he had a security badge. And now
I went up actually, but it wasn't your fault.
Yeah. So it's like, you want to tell people where to go in order to follow you. So those are some simple things. Here's my newfound understanding of why I think this is so important. And this is why I wanted to come talk about why this is Like quality engagement is about inclusion and belonging. Quality engagement, because there are ways to design engaging events that check a box. We had breakout rooms, but what happened in those rooms? Did the desired outcome happen? Did people actually engage, talk to each other? Did everyone, including new people, including demographic outliers, like younger people or older people or people of color, did they all feel like they could fully participate? Did introverts have a better sense of like how this room is being set up and how should I comport myself? That's why I think it's important. And as the description for this call was saying, that when we lack that, when we are not so thoughtful in our design, then the most privileged voices will speak. Like there will always be someone willing to grab the microphone. It'll be the most senior people in the room. It'll be the long-time attendees. It'll be people who are older, right? There'll be white people, like there'll be men, like there'll always be somebody willing to grab the mic. When you get into those breakout rooms and there's no structure, somebody will grab the mic. They might also facilitate and allow other people to grab the mic, or they might just take the mic. And so 25 minutes where you're not getting to see what's happening in the room. Now, you may not have to worry about this as much when you have 3 CEOs, so they're all bigger personalities. But if you were to have like a more mixed community, that to me was like, whoa, that would be really hard. I wouldn't know if that would work because of the length of time and who's in the room. And I'd have to be much more thoughtful about who I was putting in the room. So those are the kinds of things I think about. So what I'd like to do is, if you have a question, you either could do this. You can either raise your hand using the raise hand function under reactions, or one other tip I love using for when I have larger events is to ask people to write the word question in all caps before their question in chat. And what I like about this is when you ask people to use the raise hand function, it's better than just saying, go ahead and unmute. Let's just think about this last phrase, go ahead and unmute, which I hear all the time, even 2 years later. I'm at the end of my presentation and it's time for Q&A, and I would just say, go ahead and unmute. Now, let's think about what this looks like in person. Would I ever get to the end of a presentation in person and then just say, go ahead and start talking? No, there'd be some cue about, okay, we're gonna raise hands. We're gonna collect index cards with your comments. We're going to ask you to line up on this side of the room by a microphone, right? There's gonna be some kind of hint as to how we're going to now invite people to participate in Q&A. So the same parameters should apply. We just give people what they are. Now, I love taking questions via chat because then I get to decide, well, one, it's a question, not just handing the microphone to the first person who grabs it, which disproportionately we'll find is an older white man who has not a question, but a comment or a story. And then your facilitator role, and especially in person, this is hard. You have to figure out how to like get the microphone back. Whereas online, I find it actually a little easier. And I'll tell you my secret for interrupting in a moment. But if you have questions coming in through chat, then you're more likely to be able to pull what I think of as more generous questions. And these are the questions where more people in the room would appreciate hearing the response. Occasionally, people have a hyper specific to their own situation. Their organization has a question, and that you can either decide not to address and just write them a note and saying, I'll reach out to you after, or have your chat moderator, even better, just acknowledge the question and say, great question. We'll have the speaker connect with you after so you guys can discuss that. Or if you have a long Q&A, you could just say those to later so that, you kind of answered other people's questions first. But at least Now, does that mean you never invite people to unmute? Sure, you can invite an unmute. I might say, Abby, I saw your question, and before I answer it, let me get a little more clarity around the purpose of your event, right? Then Abby comes on and answers that answer, and that I get to say, okay, well, based on that, here's what I would say, which is a little bit different than I'm just shooting from the hip, trying to answer generically. So I can answer specifically, and then I want to say, well, that's an answer for just Abby, but let me just draw back a little bit and give you a little more of some guidelines, best practices for how you might apply this to your own situation. And that way, what had been a little bit more of a specific question for Abby can also be a more universally of interest question for everyone else in the room. Now, I think figuring out how to use a chat moderator, because that's really key, or a Zoom producer, or however you want to call this, a volunteer, because I actually had this happen in 2020. I was a participant on a Zoom call, and the presenter, while unmuted, was looking through chat for questions. Okay, wait, is it Instapot or Instapot? I don't know. Why is it cats? Why are we talking about cats? Oh, I found a question. And I was like, oh my gosh, you just said all that out loud. Like, we're watching you mutter your way through, and the whole time we're not connected to you. Like, I'm not looking, they're not looking at us, right? They're doing this. And so you want to avoid this and instead have somebody identify questions for you. So if you like to read your own questions and pick them, then what I do is I have the chat moderator or Zoom producer copy questions into a Google Doc that's shared between us. And then I can kind of just glance even as I'm presenting at that, and then interweave some of the questions. Because, sometimes the questions are about content that I'm about to talk about anyway. And so I can just sort of acknowledge, like, hey, I noticed this question coming up, and here I'm actually going to talk about that now. And so I call out that person's name. And what I do is the chat moderator will actually copy the person's name and not just the question, so I can acknowledge them. Abby, you seem to have something. Come join us.
Sorry, I just figure I'm kind of making this conversation. I don't know if that's your intention, but what about if you don't want to ask people if they have questions, but you want them to share out? Like, they go into breakout rooms and they come back and you want to invite them to share with a larger group, which can be intimidating, or people like, I don't know if my thing is interesting enough to share with the group. Do you have any tips for getting people to feel comfortable being willing to share out without putting them on the spot and saying everyone who is in every group needs to say something? Like, is there an in-between there?
Abby, great question. And yes, I do. If you pull strings, I can talk about any and all of this because I love it. I'm so passionate about it. So please do ask the questions to help me kind of drive the conversation towards what you're most interested in. So I have multiple ways that I debrief after a breakout. And I had someone point out the other day that the fact that I didn't do the same breakout a debrief every time was actually refreshing. Like, if every time you come back from a breakout room, you always have people raise their hand if they have something to say, that in itself gets boring. Like, and think about self-nomination is going to be most likely from the people who feel most comfortable speaking to the group, which is, again, going back to the most privileged voices among us. So my favorite for the win-win is to actually do nominations in chat. So I will say to people as they head into the breakout rooms, pay attention to what other people are sharing in their wins, because when we get back, I'm going to ask if anyone in your group had a win worth sharing with all of us, something you think really deserves all of us giving our kudos. And I teach them as part of a sort of Zoom orientation about using the emojis. And there's actually little 3 dots to the right of the party cone. There's so many more emojis now. And then this is American Sign Language for applause. So I teach them that, so that when they do have people sharing out, we're all doing this or throwing emojis up on the screen, which gives that person a little bit of energy back. And so I love the nomination, because it often happens that people who are new will get nominated, which never would happen. Like, they would never otherwise have raised their hand, because like you said, like, they're not sure, is this my space, blah, blah, blah. But if someone else is like, oh, I really love what you had to say. Another one I really like to do is, as people are going off, particularly if it's like a learning, like my weekly calls are often around business growth strategies. And so I might send people off to talk about getting testimonials for their work and how they repurpose testimonials. And I'll say, I know there's a few of you that you take notes. Like, it's just who you are. I'm not assigning anyone to take notes, but there's always somebody in the group who's like really into taking notes. And that's how you process the information. If you note either a lot of information or even just one thing catches your eye, when you come back, I would love you to raise your hand to just share what your takeaways were. But don't feel like you have to explain everything you learned, because if you share something that Bob said, we can always have Bob unmute to kind of fill in the gap about what he was teaching us. And so that is a really cool way for people who are more likely to be kind of note takers, and maybe they didn't feel like they had a lot to share, for them to synthesize a few points from their group, self-nominated to do that, but they're the ones who are saying, I heard this really cool thing. I don't think I could do it justice. Here's like the highlights, but Bob, would you be willing to share? And now Bob's like, wow, that was a thing people noticed. I'll take the mic and try to explain more about that to the group. So I like both of those things a little more than the traditional, like have people raise their hand, which I think has its moments, but you don't actually know what they're going to say. Is it really worth everyone hearing it? And another thing about having people raise their hand or even comment in chat is that you could then be thoughtful about who you pull up. Like you do not have to go in order of the raised hands. If you say, hey, I may not get to everyone who raises their hand, I'm going to be trying to make sure we hear from a blend of voices, a diversity of voices, a range of voices, right? Then you can look for people that maybe have some demographic or psychographic differences and bring them into the conversation. So while it can be helpful to know, oh, who raised their hand in what order, you also can decide, like, listen, everybody, I want to make sure a bunch of people get heard, because there might be two people who always raise their hand first. And it just like in a classroom, you might want to like, thank you. All right. Does anyone else? Colin, you had something.
Yeah, just sort of on the same kind of topic. I also I assist with like a monthly event series. We're very similar to Abby. We do a really lengthy breakout rooms of about 20-25 minutes because we were constantly getting that we didn't have enough time. And I'm curious if you have any tips or suggestions. Obviously, there's a lot of content discussed in 20 minutes. So sometimes a challenge when you're having people share out is keeping them on track and not having, I guess, and you mentioned you have some tips for interrupting. So perhaps it's something you're going to cover anyway, but just suggestions on how to, when you're handing over the mic, how to kind of keep people, because you can tell people you have 2 minutes, but they don't always.
Yes, this is true in person as well. And I will tell you that I actually do think it's easier to manage virtually. And the difference is that virtually we all have a microphone. Whereas sometimes in person, the one microphone in the room got handed over to the person in the audience who starts to pontificate. And you're like, ah. I've also, as a stage manager and as the host of an event, have had to, give the signal that it's time's up, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, time's up. And then stand to the side of the stage, stand on the stage steps, stand on the stage, walk over to the podium, stand next to them at the podium, put my arm around them on the podium to get the microphone, and then like lean into the mic and thank them very much. So much effort. Here, it comes down to thank you, thank you, thank you, next. So it would be like, Colin, you're telling a story. And I'm like, oh, thank you, Colin. Yeah, that's great. Thanks. I'm so glad you're sharing this. Thank you so much. All right, now we're going to hear from Abby, right? It's a little softer because I've also seen people be like, all right, that's enough, Colin. Abby, it's your turn. And that makes everyone apprehensive. It's not just Colin who's feeling the brunt of that, because if I know that kind of facilitation is what's going to happen, it's going to make me anxious about speaking up. And I'm an outgoing extrovert. So, think about how it's impacting people who are shyer or more introverted or new, so just because you're effective at getting people to shut up doesn't mean you're creating an environment where people want to speak. And so again, purpose first design, like why are you inviting people to speak to begin with? And then how do you gently nudge them along? The other thing I will say about the sort of rule of how many minutes and all that is, let's say, there's, first of all, there's some technology you can use. There's something called a blue sky timer that you can, it's like a plugin for Zoom, and it shows up as a screen on its own, and you have to stay in gallery mode to see it. Maybe the only downside, but when you're in gallery mode, you see it, and the person behind the scenes can set it. And so I'm in a networking event where we each get 15 seconds to do our intros. Now, you get really good at that over time, but people who are new, like they didn't expect that. And so when they go past it, if they go past it by a couple of seconds, it's fine, but if they keep going, she will interrupt them, because if you don't interrupt them, then it's pointless to have had that blue sky timer counting down to begin with. What happens is if 3 people later, you finally go, okay, you know what? We're going to have to make sure we can keep to the 30 seconds as agreed, because, we're just not going to have time for everyone. That person you just said that in front of is going to feel super chastised and called out, because in their mind, the last 2 people that went before them took 3 minutes. So they have 3 minutes. Like the rules got reset. So not only do we have to have rules, but I think we need to facilitate them and do that fairly quickly, because if we don't, then new norms are going to get set. And then when you go to interrupt, it's going to really feel like you're calling people out, as opposed to just like gently reminding people, like as soon as it happens, like as soon as they transgress. In person, I used to do 3 sentences or 30 seconds. And so if people kept going, I would just go like, we're done, right? And then they go, I'm done. I was like, okay, good, because I was about to open my mouth. Like you get that much time from me, and then I'm gonna have to say something, And so they learn really quickly that I was, no one knows how long 30 seconds is without a clock. So we really, 3 sentences. So those are the kinds of things to do, is just like decide what it is. And the other thing is to demonstrate how to do it. So similar to giving your prompt to a breakout room, if you want people to introduce themselves in 15 seconds or 30 seconds or 2 minutes, give your answer in that amount of time, right? Set the tone, demonstrate that it's possible, be really clear on what you want them to include. Don't make it super complex, because sometimes it's like your name and you're this and you're that. And they're like, what were the things? Now, if you can write all those down and have them listed somewhere, even in chat, fine, have them answer 5 things, but they have to be visible somewhere. Share it on your screen, which makes it a little harder to see everybody, but be really clear on like, why are you asking all these things? Is it really necessary? I prefer to have people put their like their full name, if they don't have it, their location and their pronouns, if they would like, in their named here thing. And mine's actually defaulted to display that. Because then when they get into breakout rooms, they have that information connected to them. If they just write in chat where they're from, which is that's an old webinar warm up. that's from 2019. I almost said 1919. Oh my gosh. That's from 2019 to have people like warm up. Oh, hey, tell us where you're calling in from. But if you're going to be doing breakout rooms, it's worth taking time to explain to people how to update their name, because that will go with them into the rooms. Or if you're doing something where their title would make more sense, or their region. So always, when I work with my clients, I always say, like, what would be the information you would have on a name tag that would help people find connection in small groups? Okay, let's put that on there. Like back in the day when everyone was using Twitter, like I would say, well, why don't we just put their Twitter handle on their name tags? Because that's actually how people know each other. My friend's at Pistachio. It took me a long time to remember her name was Laura. Like that's how I knew her. So having at Pistachio would be like, oh, I know who this is, as opposed to having just her name. So what would be that key piece of information, then using that so people can, again, more fully connect with each other in these small groups. So these longer sessions, I guess I can also push back on, we didn't have enough time. Do you know that that's always going to be true? As a convener, you've probably always heard, even for in-person, let's talk about in-person for a second. We didn't have enough networking opportunities. We want to do more networking. And so as a convener, you design more networking breaks and more networking breaks. And you go from 15 minutes of passing to 20 minutes to 30 minutes of passing. We don't have enough time. You know what's wrong? They don't know how to use the time. It's not that there isn't enough time, because if they're effective, they know how to walk into a breakout, like concurrent breakout sessions in person, 5 to 10 minutes before the next one starts, and meet the exact people they need to meet, because it's the same people who chose one of 6 or 43 sessions and came a few minutes early. But most people coming into those sessions a little early sit as far as they can from each other and get on their phones. But if you have volunteers or hosts at the door of those rooms to interrupt that and help people talk to each other, then they're more likely to meet the people they would be most interested in meeting than they would be thrown into yet another networking snack break because people just don't know how to use the time. So if you give people more structure, they might get more out of a 10-minute conversation and a thoughtful 10-minute debrief than they would for a 20-minute discussion in a breakout room without a lot of guidance, with one person probably dominating, and not always in a bad way. Like even for my, I do a choose your own adventure breakout rooms where, now we have the participant choose room option on Zoom. I did this when we didn't have that, and we had to make every single person a co-host, which was a lot of effort. But I thought it was so important to find ways for people to connect around shared interests, shared challenges, shared identities. And so our topics range from, what's streaming, like what's on Netflix, to business related topics. And that way people can find each other. But I always say, don't put more than 12 people in a room. Like if you notice that your room's getting filled up and now it's 10, 11 people and you've been here for a while, think about what else you want to be doing and go check something else out. If your room has 12 people and you're thinking about going in, like wait a little bit, because no one is being paid to facilitate. So 12 or more people requires some kind of facilitation for people to feel heard. And if you have a lot to say on a topic, like maybe you're a topic, like one of my topics is LinkedIn, don't just grab the mic and pontificate. I didn't pay anyone to speak, but maybe share some resources in chat, let people know you're available, throw 2 cents in, and then, let people find you. Whether you stay in the room and listen, observe, or you head off somewhere else, they'll find you. Being really clear about we're not wanting people to take over. And that way I can freely let, 100 people into 12 rooms and be like, go out, have at it, and they'll figure it out amongst themselves. And mostly I have not had a problem of doing this for 2 years. So those are some ideas for how you might manage people's expectations, because they're always going to say they need more time, but part of it's like structure of that time. And there might be more value in the debrief with everybody than there would be in having too much to debrief. Like you said, what is the right thing to ask for 20 minutes? I guess one thing, Colin, would be to have people write in chat their one top takeaway. And I have a technique for this that I call the waterfall effect debrief. And let's actually all try this, okay? So when I tell you to, I want you to write your favorite pump up song, your favorite pump up song. What's the song you listen to when you're like, I want to get in the mood, have a lot of fun, be energized? So take a moment and without hitting enter, write your favorite pump up song. Okay, is everyone ready? 3 seconds, 2, 1, hit enter. This is the first time I've had a group ignore me. You all just didn't do it?
It was so fast. I had to look up and think about the song, and I don't have that on the top of my brain.
You don't have the top of your brain a pump up song? All of you were stuck?
No, I couldn't think of one,
okay,
but I know the
fine.
effect.
Okay, I've never
I
had
have
this
it
problem
now,
before.
but I was not ready for that.
I will do it differently. What is your favorite color when I tell you to hit enter? There's a limited number of choices here probably, although don't tell me. I'm sure there's a kaleidoscope of choices. When everyone is ready, hit enter. All right, so mauve and periwinkle have never in my history been colors that I would have thought would come up. What a quirky group. I love this. I love this. And then Cassie's like all the colors, and I would have said rainbow. So that's true. So when you have 30, 50, 60, 80, 100 people in a room and you have them do this, and I obviously was condensing the amount of time, but you want to tell them what the prompt is, remind them that they're not hitting enter, what you're creating. And I would take up to a minute to give them time to write something out. What you're giving them is as close to an analog moment as you can get in a digital environment. And what I mean by that is analog would be everyone take paper and pen and jot down your one takeaway. And nothing happens for 1 minute until you then ask people to speak about something, right? So by the way, using paper and pen to write something is a great tool in a digital environment. And I think we forget that that's actually a possibility, giving people a chance to do that. But I like doing this way because then at the end, I can scroll through and call out some of the responses. And then people, and I basically will say, okay, now that everyone's just done that, you scroll up and see what catches your eye. So I've done this with, if you had free time, what would you want to learn? I always say if you had free time because everyone wants to tell me how they don't have free time. And I'm like, okay, but if you had free time, what would you want to learn? And we'll get them to breakout rooms, talk about that. And then when they get back, I say, okay, now without hitting enter, I want you to write down what you would like to learn because they've had time to think about it in small groups, talk about it, come back. And when I finally tell them to hit enter, they do. Now, what you're doing is you're helping their brains. This is actually really good for neurodivergent people who might find overstimulation from multiple inputs, which by the way is kind of all of us. Like we're a little bit all overwhelmed. This is part of the Zoom fatigue when I'm asking you to do 6 things at once. And so if we pause the chat, basically don't hit enter, the chat won't move while we're typing. Because a lot of times we're rushing to type because the moment is flying by. So if we pause that and we say, write a thoughtful response, and then we tell everyone to enter, everyone had that moment. And then I say, now take a couple minutes to find people you might be able to help with the thing they'd like to learn. And so someone would write, I want to learn how to speak more fluent German. And someone else is like, I speak fluent German. I would love to do that. Like that kind of thing happens all the time in my events. And so that's the sort of serendipity, but it's because we're capturing the takeaways in a thoughtful way. We're inviting everyone, even the people who might need a moment to really think about their favorite pump up song, which by the way is how I've built a really great library of fun songs, is by asking that question at a few big events. And so I have this fun library to use. Dusty Rose, Abby, thank you. So I have some resources I want to share as we're winding down, just that you can know more about how I can keep supporting you and connecting with you. And these are all things that, Colin, you're welcome to share with the replay if you'd like. So I'm putting a couple things in chat so far. So the first thing is that I have been hosting this free virtual happy hour since March 13th, 2020. It's currently a monthly free event, and the other weeks I do it, but it's part of a private membership club, which is $25 a month, but it is one of the big benefits. I then also have a training program that's a certification program for people who want to know how to do this better. And I do support organizations, mainly mission-driven organizations, and bringing their events online, as Colin mentioned. I'm also a business growth strategist. I host a podcast. I have 2 books. You can find out all about me on my website. I have a lot of resources that I think you might be interested in for speakers and for anyone who wants to get better with facilitating. And so one is, I have this as a PDF. So let me just share this screen for a second. When I do my speaker prep sessions for my events that I'm producing for a client, these are some of the topics that I touch on, and I give them access to this resource. I give you the PDF version, but like for instance, for breakout rooms, I have sort of some ideas about, how many people for what kind of thing. If it's a quick intro, you can do 6 minutes. If you're doing an exercise, 4 or 5 people for 10 minutes. You can have up to 8 people for 15 minutes, but then beyond that, it starts to need some facilitation, I think. Framing the question, I have all kinds of tips around how to frame the question. I talk about, equipment and sound and cameras and internet connection and all that good stuff. And then down here, I have some of my videos, but I've created, which I put in there, the robbiesamuels.com/videos. I created this handout. I've done over 70 plus 3 to 5 minute Zoom tutorial videos, but here I've got 33 of them organized by sort of category. So there's some Zoom settings that I think people just don't know about, that zoom.us. There's also some great settings for even the app itself. And then before the event, so for instance, like I just showed Colin at the beginning of this, like you can close the waiting room. You can only disable the waiting room though, if you have the passcode enabled for that meeting, which means you also need to know how to make the passcode embedded in the link in order to make it easier for people to get in. So it's not really security. I don't know, but Zoom is requiring it. So if you want to disable the waiting room, I think of it as a teacher. I want to tell students, hey, if the door is closed, I'm not quite ready. I'm still setting up the classroom. Just wait in the hallway. That's the waiting room. But when I'm ready, I want to prop the door open, wave in the people from the waiting room, right? From the hallway, but then I'm going to leave the door open, and any student who arrives after that moment will just walk in. And so the waiting room to be on, you let in just your fellow presenters to kind of do final tech check, but you keep the room closed. And then when you're ready, you go over to security. And when you're a host or co-host, you'll see that, and you disable the waiting room, and then you go to participants and you admit all, which is waving them in. And at that point, you never have to think about it again, which means you no longer have to worry about people getting stuck in your waiting rooms. It's an example of, a little bit about design. I do countdown slides with my clients. I talk about music, not how, but why I use music to help people. Mainly it's to have a curtains closed moment before the session begins, or as people come back from breakout rooms to have a little bit of energy. And then presenting with slides, like a lot of times people don't know how to do the spotlight, or when they don't know that they can like take off on and off their slides. Like right now, I am sharing something and then I'm going back and looking at the camera and then I'm going to share something again. And I think a lot of times for people like that never happens. And so they just stay stuck behind their slides. Talk about how to share slides with multiple monitors. And there is a way to see up to 24 participants while sharing your slides. So if you need that energy back, you don't want to this is why webinars are so hard, because a true webinar format is, just talking to a wall the entire time, right? It's just not quite as good. And then these are some facilitation tips. Like the one I talked to you about, thank you next for interrupting. I have some best practices for running Q&A, talk about the difference. These are different engagement tools that I think people confuse all the time. Wheel of Names is a really fun engagement tool that you can use for various things. And then Captions, which is free, even for the free Zoom. And it needs to be enabled initially and then enabled for each session after that. But what an amazing resource to have, both for people who might need to have the ability to read the captions in order to fully engage, but also if people step away for a moment, they can always go back to the transcript to see what they missed. And you can give people the option to save the transcript, even if you're not sharing the replay, or even if you are sharing the replay, or if you want to turn that into a blog post, it's already transcribed for you and free. So definitely a resource. And then lastly, I have 8 different resources around designing engaging breakout rooms, because so much of it is structure. It's these little tips I've shared about like giving a demonstration, asking the right question, what was the prompt, how many minutes, making sure that people know like there's a way to know how much time is running out loud, about all that stuff is things that a lot of people just don't know, and by default they're not set up. So those are some things that I hope will help you. I think I've shared all these resources that I had. I had everything that I had is now in chat. So if you want to just save the chat, you can go to the bottom right corner of the chat window, 3 dots, click on that and hit save chat. And Colin, I am going to turn things back to you to close up.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. I know Abby did have to run a minute early. Della, I'm glad you were able to make it back. Thank you so much to Robbie for taking the time. I mean, I've definitely learned a lot. I learned something even before we even got started. So thank you. Very happy to have had you here. Very happy to have heard a little bit more about your experience and your tips. I look forward to checking out some of these resources of yours myself. Anyone watching on the recording, we will share these out as well in the recap. We will be back we do not have a master class this month, but we will be back for our July member call next month. So you can keep an eye on your emails for more information on what the topic and the guest spark for that will be. And other than that, thank you all for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.